we will begin by talking about the Thursday night game for you guys, the one between the Atlanta Falcons and the Carolina Panthers. This is a rematch. Obviously, the Carolina Panthers took down the Falcons at home. This game is in Carolina. Now, the Falcons are looking to be a bit healthier than they were the last time that they faced off against the Carolina Panthers. Real question for the Panthers is, do they have Christian McCaffrey back? Now, at this point, it is looking very iffy for Christian McCaffrey to return this week. Most likely he's going to be back in week 9. He's technically allowed to return, but it's still looking less than likely that he will. So we will move forward with the assumption that Christian McCaffrey is out. Whereas on the other side of the ball, we've got Julio Jones has been removed once again from the injury designation. And historically, Julio Jones has completely torched the Panthers for fantasy purposes. This is going to be a pretty interesting game. I'm pretty excited about it. A lot of these Thursday night games, with the exception of the Buccaneers and Bears, have been really fun to watch, and I think this one will be yet another good game here. We've got a 51.5 point over under. Panthers favored to win this one by 2.5 points. I feel like that's a pretty fair comparison for the Falcons, considering when they lose, they always seem to lose just barely. Panthers coming in at 3-4. Falcons obviously only winning one game thus far. Should be a fun divisional battle here. Falcons, as we keep mentioning, their defense is arguably the worst in the league in terms of giving up fantasy points. They have tightened up. I have to admit, the last couple weeks they have looked a bit better. Playing the Vikings pretty hard. And then last week, Matthew Stafford ended up disappointing for fantasy purposes. But that being said, no quarterback has thrown for less than 300 yards facing the Falcons at this point, which is why the Falcons have been giving up the number one amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks. They're 12th in points allowed for running backs and one of the highest points allowed for receivers and tight ends. This is going to be another matchup we want to exploit, whereas the Panthers have had a more solid defense, but again, I'm not nearly as concerned about it. They've had some decent matchups in terms of playing against teams like the Bears that didn't perform that well. I do think this will end up being a more of a high-scoring game. I'm not worried about any of the Falcons starts here. The Panthers, to me, are a bit of an anomaly of a defense. I think as the season goes on, we'll start to see all of the numbers creep up. Obviously, the Panthers have been one of the easiest teams to score on the ground, but we saw the Saints pretty much do whatever they wanted to do through the air last week, and I think the Falcons will be able to do more of the same here in week 8. So who we're starting this week? Pretty easy for me. We're starting all of the main guys here. We've got Matt Ryan going. We've got Todd Gurley, of course, going against the Panthers. Always going to be playing running backs against the Panthers as long as their defense continues to allow fantasy over 20 fantasy points a game on the ground. Julio Jones, as we mentioned at the lead-in here, is off of the injury report. Does not look like he's bringing either his hip or his hamstring injury designation into the game. Last time we saw him do that was the game against the Vikings, where he threw up over 40 fantasy points. So let's fire up Julio again. Calvin Ridley, of course, another good start here. Love both of these guys this week. Now the real question is, can you trust any of the other starts here? Gates has been okay, but with Julio Jones fully healthy, I don't anticipate that this is going to be a situation where we're going to see 3 receivers really involved. I'm pretty much just sticking with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. Hopefully you have better options this week than having to pivot down to a guy like Gage. Hurst is the real question mark. The one area that I actually am pretty impressed with the Panthers has been their ability to slow down tight ends. I don't know that this is a really good week to start Hayden Hurst. Yes, he has been involved the past couple weeks, scoring on a long touchdown 2 weeks ago, and had a decent amount of receptions and yards last week. I just don't really want to throw a tight end out in this matchup here. I feel like that could end up being a trap here, especially after 2 good weeks in a row for Hurst. I feel like this is a down game for him. So he's the only one of the main starters there in Atlanta that I'm looking to pivot off of. Whereas on the Panthers side, we're starting Bridgewater. We're starting Mike Davis, as we mentioned again in the lead-in. It does look like Christian McCaffrey will miss one more week, should be back in week 9. And that's where things get interesting, because we want to see what that touch share looks like between Mike Davis and Christian McCaffrey. But as long as Christian McCaffrey is out, Mike Davis has been a pretty decent start. He has slowed down the last couple weeks, but the Falcons defense does not scare me at all. So I think we can fire up Mike Davis one last time. Robby Anderson and DJ Moore, both top 20 options this week. Anderson still getting the higher target share, but DJ Moore finally starting to find his way into the end zone. Still think DJ Moore is the better player overall, even if he's not seeing the highest amount of targets. I think he carries a higher upside every week. So we're firing both of these guys up. Now, Curtis Samuel, you could also talk me into playing. He's had double-digit fantasy points in the last 2 games that he's played. Obviously missed one due to, I believe it was a knee injury. He looked to be fully healthy again coming in last week. So if you're in a bit of a pickle, you have some guys on bye or some guys that are hurt this week, I do think you could do worse than Curtis Samuel as your flex. But again, just as a PSA, if you play anyone on Thursday night, do not put them into your flex spot. There's no reason to prevent yourself from being able to have that flexibility later in the week. If you start a running back or a wide receiver tomorrow night, make sure you put them in your running back or wide receiver spot, so that way you have the opportunity to move someone out should something happen later. I mean, I feel like at this point everyone should know that, but given that we're still in COVID season, we've seen crazier things happen where games just get canceled out of nowhere. Give yourself as much flexibility as possible as the week goes on. We're not starting Ian Thomas, even though the Falcons are giving up the most points to opposing tight ends. They went against the Saints last week, who were top 3 in points allowed for tight ends, and we didn't recommend starting Ian Thomas there. He put up basically nothing last week, so I don't expect him to really do much more here. This is a game where I'm pretty much avoiding the tight ends, but we'll start everyone else. I like the Panthers in this one. I think they end up eking this one out and go 4-4. Got the Panthers winning this one at home 28-24.